Life doesn't move in straight lines. It twists, turns, and surprises us along the way. On Better Things Ahead, we talk with people who have walked those winding paths. Each story reminds us of the lessons, hope, and promise of better things ahead.
Welcome into Better Things Ahead. This week, we're going to continue our Serve series. Last week, we started and talked to a local ministry called In His Steps and talked about some of the things that they were doing. And so this week, we're going to be talking about prison ministry. I'm mcloyd. I'm the Executive and Discipleship Pastor here at Ridgecrest, and joining with me this week is our Senior Pastor, Michael Estes.
Glad to be here. Good to see you guys.
Absolutely.
Kelly over there.
Hello.
Hi, everybody.
So we got a full house today. Yep. So this week wanted us to kind of talk about, the idea of prison ministry a little bit. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to follow up with an interview of Anna Given. She is a member of our church who's involved in our local prison ministry. Mm-hmm. And she'll kind of share about that experience, the things that she's seen and, all those kinds of things. And so to kind of introduce that, I thought it'd be a great opportunity for us just to, in general, talk about serving specifically in prison ministry, mm-hmm. the need for it, the benefits of it, the risks associated with it, all those kinds of things, just to kind of set the stage a little bit. And through Ridgecrest, of course, one of the key things that we hold to is this idea of serving our community, mm-hmm. and finding ways to do that and interact with individuals in our community.
Yeah.
And so, of course, Scripture, talks about, different people groups that we should be intentionally seeking out to serve.
Yes,
and
right.
So I think there's this balance of we should be serving on an ongoing basis, but we should also be looking for opportunities to specifically serve those that other people may not be serving. Mm-hmm. Prison ministry, I think, is one of those.
Yeah, the larger category would be people that are underprivileged or something along those lines. That's probably a more modern term than the one the Bible would use. But like if you look at the way prison ministry is described in Scripture, it's often lumped together with ministry to widows, to orphans, to the poor. In Matthew 25, Jesus talks about going and visiting those who are in prison, and he talks about that along the same lines of taking care of those who are in need as far as in poverty, people who are sick, those sorts of things. And so there is a kind of a repeated theme throughout the New Testament specifically, but I think more generally in Scripture, that one of the ways that we can love those in our community, and this, I would say, you mentioned serving, I would say that also in our vision, this overlaps with reaching, mm-hmm.
because
Because there is a community of people in prisons that need the gospel. And we can serve them, and we can also share with them while we're there serving them. And so I think it's completely biblical idea for us as believers to go and spend time in prisons and to minister to people in those places.
Yeah, and last week within His Steps, and also in our interview, we're going to talk about it, this idea of relationship building, mm-hmm. Because I think one aspect of serving in general, is the idea of, well, I'm doing this because it makes me feel good. And you mm-hmm. kind of walk that line of why am I serving, kind of the motivation behind that. And so, I'll ask you kind of just get your opinion, specifically with prison ministry. Why do you think we should be involved or, in any kind of prison or jail ministry? We mentioned they're listed in Scripture, mm-hmm. but some might say, well, that's a different culture, different experiences, all those kinds of things, so whatever. But what are some things you think about? What are some benefits of serving in the jails? I
think it's a reinforcement of the heart of the gospel, that forgiveness is at the root of what we believe as Christians. And so because that is kind of foundational for what we believe, we can walk into places and be with people that the rest of society would see as basically, a waste of time, or we need to forget about them, and see people who need God's forgiveness. They've experienced things that ultimately they're experiencing the consequences of decisions that they've made, but we can offer them the grace that God has given us, and also realize, the Apostle Paul talks about the fact that it's the grace of God that maybe has kept us out of that situation in some cases. And it's only by his grace that we are in the situation that we are, so that we can go into these places and be like, look, God's grace is available to you too. And we don't forget about people in those situations, because and that's another thing that like I think is foundational to the Christian faith, is the idea of the sanctity of life. And that's not just, I know we talk about that a lot of times in terms of the unborn, but that goes across the spectrum of life. That from the youngest of the young to the oldest of the old, every person has value, and that value is not rooted in what that person has done or how they can contribute to society. Is rooted in the fact that they're created by God. Now, obviously, people in prisons, they've gone on a path that, in a lot of cases, has led them to places that they didn't want to be. But they've made decisions that ultimately have affected their life very negatively. That doesn't mean they don't have value anymore. They're not throwaways. And so we as believers really, really believe that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, with prison ministry, you have kind of this stigma and all those kinds of things, and, just a lot of, stuff that kind of goes along with it. But statistics, actually, one interesting statistic I saw was that 40% of those that are incarcerated, whether it be, jail, prison, federal prison, whatever context, 40% of those individuals were out of work the month leading up to their arrest, which I found very interesting.
Yeah.
And, what the most interesting part of that was I immediately thought about after prison and after jail, how difficult it is for individuals to find employment, be reintroduced into, civilian life, or I don't know how you technically characterize that, but coming back into the work world and trying to find a job, trying to, be reintroduced and assimilate into community again. And a lot of places and employers immediately see that and they're like, nah, I don't want to take the risk, or I don't want to do those kinds of things. And so I think prison ministry as a whole, there's a platform there for us to be able to show grace, as you mentioned, as well as perhaps, of course, share the gospel, have Bible study, use that as spiritual transformation.
That's right.
So that way, moving out of that, now they have this faith in Christ that they're able to rest their life on, and then start looking for opportunities kind of from that motivation.
Well, and you mentioned the fact that like relationship is an important part of this. So like they then connect with a church community that they could potentially come to, and whereas a lot of prisoners, when they would get out of prison, they may or may not have families that are waiting on them, because in some of those cases they've burned those bridges. But we could potentially provide community for some of this. I know, like, the movies are not accurate depictions of things, but have you ever seen Shawshank Redemption? Mm-hmm. Okay, so toward the end of it, there's a prisoner that's been in there basically his entire life. Most of his adult life has been in prison. He gets out. He has no community. He goes into the workforce, and he doesn't. His employer doesn't trust him, and he doesn't really understand how to reintegrate into societal life. And ultimately, he finds that it's too hard for him to do that. He thinks about committing a crime so they can go back into jail, that sort of thing. And there's a part of me, because that's its own community.
Yeah.
So there's a part of me that sees the benefit of churches, specifically local churches, going into prisons and trying to create relationships with these folks, so that when they get out, they have maybe a community of people that can take care of them and help them take those steps to get back into society, and not just become productive members of society, but people who have been transformed by the gospel, and people who can ultimately grow the kingdom of God through their experiences.
Yeah. And I think, along that side now, you build those connections with the individuals going into the jails, going into the prisons, and having Bible study, sharing, leading to life change, all those kinds of things. And now you have that initial point of community. Introduce them into the larger church body, where there might be a business owner.
That's
there
right.
might be, someone else who knows someone who's hiring, and you build this network to be able to support this individual. And I'm a firm believer that the rehabilitation process is what, heavily needs to be addressed, and create those opportunities for those individuals. There was one time, there was a church, I believe, I'm trying to remember. It's been a couple of years since I've talked to them, but I believe they were in California. But they had started a business that was, there's some, IRS type stuff where a church can start a business as a way to help support things. But they had done this, and they had opened up a thrift store specifically to kind of serve their community in that way, and started this business. But what they did for this business was they hired individuals who were in, prison. And so essentially their prison ministry, what it looked like was they would go into the prison, do the Bible studies, do the ministry while they're there and there, and then they would get out of the prison and they would be automatically kind of enrolled in the local church. Had essentially a nonprofit rehabilitation process where they walked through job training, they walked through how to create a resume and those job skills to help prepare them. And then once they completed that, they would hire them in this thrift store that the church owned and give them employment. And so that way those individuals had an easy on-ramp as far as coming out of prison, being brought back into, general, society, having that opportunity to build that resume again and be able to show, hey, I've worked here for 2 years and now I can go on and get this other job here or whatever. And you're building those relationships, building that rapport, so that way we're creating, again, because we value the life of that individual and we want to figure out a way. And so I think there's a lot of creativity that can be utilized, within prison ministry in of itself. And, while in our interview with Anna, she's going to talk about specifically the aspect of, ministering inside those walls. But I think this has been a good conversation to help broaden that picture and see that, that's not only confined to those walls. It does branch out and that sort of thing. And so I think, anything we can do as a church to support individuals that are marginalized in society, whether it be of their own doing or not, it creates an opportunity to show grace, and be faithful to serving those. Well,
and it's the concrete manifestation of the belief that every life has value. And so, like, if we really believe that every person has value, we can find really concrete ways for them to contribute to society, contribute to culture, contribute to the kingdom. And so, like, I love the fact that, like, that what you described there, where a church was like, we're going to create a business for really the specific purpose, not really to make money. We might make money, whatever, but like it gives an outlet for people who are coming out of prisons that are going to have a difficult time finding a job. They have a job.
Yeah.
And not only do they have that, again, it goes back to they have communities that help them move forward in life and not backwards. And like that is so key to somebody, because if we really believe in things like the rehabilitation process and reformation of people and that sort of thing, like we have to give them direction and the ability to move forward in positive ways, because generally speaking, our society is not good at that. Our political, our legislation is not really built around rehabilitation. It's built around like the punitive part of prison ministry or prison stuff. It's where you get punished for what you do, but there's not really now here's the next step.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some work programs and stuff like that, but like we as a church, if we really believe in the value of human life, we can really help with that. And so, that's great stuff right there.
Yeah. And so, we had a great conversation with Anna, and as you listen to this interview, I want you to be praying and, ask that God would open your heart for potentially getting involved in a local ministry, like a prison ministry, whether you're here locally, contact us, reach out to us. We'll be happy to connect you, or you're across the country, in other states, other communities, find those local churches or, reach out to those local jails and prisons to find the opportunity to serve and prayerfully see how we might be able to truly support those in our community. So let's have a listen to our interview with Anna. Miss Anna Given, thank you for joining us on the podcast.
You're welcome.
Some of our listeners may remember you from last time you were here when you talked about when we were talking about school I was going to say school choice, but that's a completely different topic right now in our community. We were talking about public school and public education and what that looks like, and being an educator and those kinds of things. So thank you. We must not have scared you too bad the first time around.
Not too
bad. But thanks for being here. And so we're in the middle of a serving series where we're kind of talking about, how we as, followers of Christ, have the opportunity to serve those in our community and finding different ways to get involved. And so we want to bring you on because there's a specific ministry that you're involved with here locally. And so just want to kind of, hear a little bit about that. And, but that's prison ministry. And so I'd love to know kind of how you got connected or what led you to maybe pursue prison ministry as an area of service.
Yeah. So I knew that Rhonda Webb had done that for a very long time. And I can remember years and years ago, my mom had a good friend, Charlotte Purvis, who has since passed away, but she was a longtime member here, and she was involved in it, even maybe before Rhonda or maybe with Rhonda. But I can remember my mom talking about that, and I just always thought, I love being able to help. People, help in situations. Maybe that's why I'm a school teacher. Just the helping aspect is very fulfilling to me. And so through the years, I would hear about the prison ministry. And then a few years ago, I guess it was soon after COVID, I had a chance to go with Rhonda one weekend. It was one Wednesday night, and it was where she had a group of us go for, I think it might have been for an Easter celebration. And so I went, and I just fell in love with it. I think I kind of probably already had, dealing with the homeless and stuff when we would go to Beautiful Feet. It was along those lines of just when I would work with the people there that were in poverty or had, different needs. I just loved it. It was very fulfilling. So when I went to do the prison ministry, I can remember that first time I went in and we were doing worship songs together with them. And there was just something about standing there, all of us together, and all singing to the same God. And I just had tears because I just felt very much called, So, and I've been wanting to do it ever since. And so I would go on special occasions with Rhonda, and then eventually I was able to go every Wednesday night, and she has graciously let me go, and also Rita Dychley goes, and Stacy Bright's been going. Yeah. So we've had a good time.
That's great. And you kind of mentioned, I think it's a great point of service, and for people to kind of think about is you being an educator, being a teacher, finding some of those skills that you use in your professional career and how they translate and kind of, give you an opportunity to use those skills and those gifts in other ways. And so, on that note, like what are some things, like what does a typical kind of prison ministry look like? What are some things that you guys do, or what's kind of the goals of that ministry?
So on a weekly basis, we get there around 4:30 in the afternoon, and we go back. They escort us back, and we have a room that we meet in, and they bring in each cell of women. And of course, sometimes we have to cut it short because it's 3 to 4 groups, and we can't do our lesson 3 to 4 times. We would be there till 11 o'clock at night. But they have combined the groups recently, so we're able to only do the lesson once or twice. They have let us combine. And so the women come in, and the guards escort them in, and then they leave us, and we are there with them, and we do a lesson. We bring them a snack. The prison chaplain is the one that he has been very nice to let us come in, and he allows us to bring the snacks. Yeah. I don't think that's always been the case, but the current one, he does allow us to come in and bring snacks, and so they love that. They love the food. And, I've talked to Rhonda about this before. It's okay if they're coming just for the food. I'm okay with that, because when they get in there, then we've got them and we can talk to them. And so we have met all kind of women. Some of them know the Bible as well as we do. Some of them grew up in church, and then we have others that, you meet them in all walks of life, but we have others that have never heard any of it. So that's just kind of, we spend probably an hour to an hour and a half with them.
Okay.
And then we sometimes sing worship songs at the end, and then they hug us when they come in and they hug us when they leave.
Sure.
They're very happy for us to be there.
How have you seen, I've heard, not with here locally, but some other churches or other prison ministries that I've heard and kind of been around. There's sometimes this, I'm trying to think, it was almost like a dynamic of, oh, well, these people are just kind of coming in and just trying to, pat themselves on the back or, whatever, and kind of making it about the people coming in more than serving the individuals that are there. And, it's just, sometimes, and we talked about that last week on our podcast of how, that's a very easy temptation getting into serving of, doing this for ourselves to make ourselves feel good rather than figuring out actually how to serve. And so I said, so kind of like, how do you guys, what is like relationship building? You mentioned that, they're hugging you when you arrive and when they leave, how does that kind of relationship building piece work, and what does that look like? And then how have you seen those relationships create those opportunities for conversations that you kind of talked about?
Yeah. So I have lots of stories on that. Sadly, I've had a few students that I have seen in there.
Okay.
And so they come in and they realize, this is a former teacher of mine. And, one was embarrassed, one was happy to see me. And so I had already had that. One of them already had a connection with her on Facebook. So she wasn't there very long, but we still have that connection on Facebook. And I have also had, there's one inmate I can think of that she was there for 3 to 4 years. They're usually not there that long. They usually either they get released or they move on to prison, because this is just the detention center. But I had one that, we really got to know, and we formed a relationship with her over a 3-year period. And so now she's out, she's back at home, and she has messaged me on Facebook, and we're able to keep up with that. Sure. In fact, like Christmas morning, she had written me a message just to say Merry Christmas.
Yeah.
She's not asking for anything. She has lots of family support, but we just made that connection, you know. And they have the opportunity to stay behind in their cells. They don't have to come. Yeah. And so therefore, you still have some come and kind of, they're trying to see who are these people. But for the most part, they tell us, we hear this often, that we are the highlight of their week.
Yeah.
And a lot of times they don't even get to go outside. So we are the one thing they get to go to all week, and they call it church. They're going to church. Yeah. And so we've really used that as it really is there to form relationships with them.
Yeah.
And Rhonda's really good about, at the end of every time, she's very intentional about, no matter what our lesson was on that week, devotional, at the end, she presents, she wants them to have that invitation. She doesn't want anybody to leave and not know what it is to be saved and how to be saved. So we always have that as well. So.
Yeah, that's great. And like you said, sometimes even just providing those snacks or meal or whatever that looks like on occasion, creating that opening, right? And if that's why an individual is first coming to that, great, because that's what serving, figuring out a need and, trying to meet it. And then as you meet those needs, then it creates that opportunity for that continued relationship and developing trust and all those kinds of things. And so what, have either you personally or even, people have went with you, over the years, specific challenges, that you've faced within, prison ministry? Anything specific as far as the serving aspect goes? Any challenges you guys have kind of faced?
We have had a few women come in over time that they're few and far between, but we have had some women that have come in honestly to cause issues. There's one in particular that I remember that I actually had missed the one night, that the first night she showed up, but I know Rita and Rhonda both felt like it was just, she was not there, and she was not in a good place.
Yeah.
And she was honestly there to disrupt.
Yeah.
And she did not like that what we were spreading and what we were teaching.
Yeah.
But we really don't have that very often, but that was a very interesting, and she came back once after that. We were having a big meal one night, so she did show up for that.
Sure.
But she behaved herself and was quiet that night.
Yeah.
But overall, and they did have to call, the guard to come get her, but that was a one-time thing that we've had.
Yeah.
But for the most part, but it is interesting to hear them ask questions. Like 2 weeks ago, we had a lady that at the end of, I think I did the lesson that week, and she asked at the end, she said something like, "I am religious," which was, kind of, you hate to hear when it starts off that way, but she said, "I am religious, but, is that going to be enough to get me to heaven?" And so they're, some of them are very confused, and it's so, and it's good. We all have different strengths, the group that goes. And so I was able to turn that over to someone. I had just done the whole lesson. She had heard me talk. So I was able to turn that over to someone else. And they literally walked through the steps of becoming a Christian. And, you never know if it got through to her, but then everybody else is sitting there listening as well, so.
Sure.
And we have them new every single week. So you honestly could go over the same how to become a Christian every week, because there's such a big turnover.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and that's what, I think that's important to know, like specifically the context that you guys are serving in. While it's called prison ministry, it's really, jail and detention center, right?
Yeah.
And so you have individuals that could be there for a couple of days, a month, a couple of years, and then beyond that, usually they're, being transferred to a longer term facility. And so to your point, finding an opportunity to serve that gives you the opportunity to meet a whole lot of different people in a whole lot of different situations. How do you, maybe walk through when you're talking to an individual? I've had the opportunity to be, I actually went with you guys once. It's been a couple of years ago. I think we did like a baptism service and had a meal right around Easter, if I remember correctly. And then, so I've seen, jail ministry and been involved in it a little bit, and what I've seen is there's sometimes some of those individuals, like you even mentioned your student, who kind of had that guilt, shame, disappointment, right? Because I would venture to say no one in there would be able to sign up and say, yes, I want to be here.
Right.
And so, and even, some may not have remorse, but the ones who do and are kind of walking through that, how do you kind of, help them walk through that to kind of, get rid of that shame and recognize, to your point, the gospel of grace and, transformation that it kind of offers?
I'm not sure if this answers your question or not, but we do try to, and I feel like we're all very, that we try to do this. When we talk to them, we're never there preaching to them.
Yeah. We
always talk about it as all of us, and we're always talking about sin is, I sinned today. You sinned today. I mean, we always make it it's all of us.
Yeah.
It's not a we versus you.
Yes.
And so it kind of helps them that they can be more relieved, especially the newcomers when they come in, so that we're, and I'm always quick to say too, when I'm teaching, I'm always saying, guys, when I prepared this lesson, I need this. This is for me. I hope you can hear something that God wants you to hear, but I needed this today. Yeah. So we try to, and we want them to know, like, we do this because we love you. We want you to know the love of God.
Yeah.
And we try to really make that evident to them. And it's so rewarding when you are talking to them and telling them these things, and you look up and tears are just rolling down some of their faces. And then and that's a God thing.
Sure.
God did that. So
yeah,
it's pretty cool.
And that kind of goes back to what we were saying before, is that, I think people I've talked to, like if they're concerned about getting involved in a local prison ministry, is they kind of go to that like, well, I don't want to go in and feel like, make them feel like I'm trying to be holier than thou and speaking down to them or anything like that. And, I'm like, well, because you said that, that shows me that prison ministry would be a great place for you to be, because you have that heart, and, now the individuals who have talked to you like, yeah, it's a great thing to be able to go in and just tell them this and that and that. And it's like, that's not going to work. Right. And so we have to be gracious, whether it be prison ministry or otherwise, right? I think wherever. It kind of creates, an opportunity. And that's kind of my next question is, how have you seen, working in prison ministry, and serving in that manner help outside and kind of in your daily walk and daily opportunities to serve or interact with people in the community? Has it changed how you interact with people, or does it give you a different perspective on, how you approach some of those tougher conversations with someone?
Yeah, I feel like when you're in the practice of presenting the gospel, when you're in the practice of really deep, diving into Bible study so that you can teach it. Obviously, you are learning it a lot more. And I can't think of a time recently that I've used that. Of course, being in public schools, I have to, I can't, use it necessarily like I want to in the classroom. But I have had students ask me, what'd you do yesterday? Or, what are you going to do? Something about Wednesday night or church. And so I'm able to say, oh, I'm actually going to jail. And of course they love to hear that, right. 8th graders, And I'm like, but don't worry, I'll be back tomorrow. I just have to go for a little while, so they have all the questions. And there's nothing wrong with me saying I go because I'm going to tell people about Jesus, and I'm going to do a Bible study. I can, that's safe for me to say to them. And they're all ears because they're listening to what, so.
Yeah. And so early on, you mentioned how you got connected with, Rhonda and others and, several friends, and kind of in your friend group getting connected to serving. How would you kind of, if someone, listening to this podcast, we'll start with someone here locally, and, they want to kind of reach out to you and say, hey, some of these things they've said, I'm, can feel the Spirit kind of moving in me. What steps would you encourage them to kind of take to get involved in your local prison ministry?
All I know is I contacted Rhonda Webb.
Yeah.
I don't know as far as, I know someone that I graduated from high school with. I'm friends with her on Facebook. She goes to the Rankin County jail. So I do know, and maybe not all jails allow people to come in, but I do know that she has a ministry there in Rankin County. And I don't know exactly, how they go about that, but I do know that with the Madison County one, it's a background check. And then, Rhonda has always said she, loves for people to come and help out because we can't always all be there.
Sure.
So it's nice to have people to step in. And then also we have, for special occasions, such as Easter, Christmas, Thanksgiving, she opens it up to more people in the community to come in who are not able to come weekly, but they are willing to come once a quarter or whatever. So we have those opportunities as well.
Okay. And, kind of along that line, I want you to think back of when you first kind of got involved with it. Were there anything at that time that you were kind of nervous or apprehensive and that you were kind of wrestling with, like, I don't know that I want to do this, or what if this happens, or anything like that you can remember,
I mean, just obviously not knowing what I was getting into, just that first time or two. And I really didn't expect maybe how sweet everyone was going to be and how welcoming they were going to be to us.
Yeah.
But it is very much, they are the sweetest, and I've had people say, well, aren't you afraid when they put you in that room and the guards leave? And I said, I've never, not once, have I been afraid.
Sure.
Because they are there. It's almost like they would take up for us. If anybody tried to do anything to us, they love us coming so much, they would defend us. Yeah. So we would be fine. But
that's good. And the reason I ask that is because there might be someone listening that hears all this and like, man, that sounds like a great opportunity, but I just don't know. And, and what I'm hearing is like, give it a try, right? That's what we encourage is whether it's prison ministry or another ministry for that matter, that first step is just usually the hardest one, right? And so definitely get involved. And so, and with this, while we've spent a lot of time talking about local prison ministry, those listeners and viewers out there, they, we live in a country, there are a lot of jails and prisons around us. And so, I'd encourage those individuals to find, a local church, see if they have a prison ministry. Welcome to reach out to us if, find out that there's not one. I know that, Rhonda would be a great resource and be able to talk through that. And perhaps, God's laying on someone's heart to start a prison ministry in their area. But locally, we encourage you guys to reach out to us. We'd be happy to get you guys plugged in and, just take that first step of service. And so that's great. Is there any lasting kind of things that you would say to someone kind of thinking or kind of praying about prison ministry?
Well, like you said, I think you should give it a try. Yeah. If you have that thought, give it a try and see if it's your thing, if you, feel led to continue. Because I definitely, that first time I went, I knew without a doubt, this is where I need to be. Yeah. So.
That's great. Well, again, Anna, thank you so much for being here. Those of you who've been listening and watching, again, thank you. And, look for those opportunities, whether it be here locally or wherever you find yourself, get plugged in and, see how God might be working in your life to get involved and plugged into a prison ministry.
Thanks for joining us on Better Things Ahead. Follow the show on Spotify and Apple Podcast, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for the video of our podcast. Until next time, keep moving forward because there are always better things ahead.